Emma McAdam, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. It's so fun to chat. I'm always excited when we get to chat.
I know,
And this
yeah,
one's
it's
going to
great.
be about social anxiety. This is like a type of anxiety I don't write as much about. I'm not sure why exactly, but it was very common in my practice. I dealt with a lot of social anxiety. I know you've worked with social anxiety too, so I'm excited to kind of mash our heads together and see if we can be pretty helpful for folks. And so the format will be pretty straightforward. We'll just go back and forth sharing our top three kind of suggestions or recommendations or tips for social anxiety with a little room in between for us to kind of banter back and forth because that's
Yeah,
always fun.
awesome. Yeah, that's great.
All right. So let's you kick us off. What's your first tip when it comes to social anxiety?
Yeah, so and you mentioned like this is pretty common. Social anxiety is one of the most common forms of anxiety. A lot of people have it. People's like number one fear is like public speaking is like bigger than death, right? Like social anxiety is really common. And I think a lot of us who experience it and just want to make it go away. Like I wish I didn't feel this way. I wish I didn't have this. What's the matter with me? Make this go away. Give me the tips, Emma, to make me not feel this way. And I would say that's not a very effective strategy. So let's try something else instead. Let's try starting with making a little bit of space for social anxiety. And the way I think about this is thinking like our brains and bodies are very deep and wise. They know a bunch of stuff, and our like race has survived for thousands of years thanks to our beautiful brains and bodies. And so social anxiety has to serve a function. That's my point number one. Social
Hmm.
anxiety serves a function. There's a reason we have it. And if you look at like the spectrum of people who feel anxiety, there's people who feel very, very little anxiety, and there's people who feel a lot more anxiety, and then there's the people in the middle. And you might think, oh, the people who are disordered are always on this end. But you look at the people who have zero anxiety or very, very, very little social anxiety. Like they don't feel for other people and they are just as disordered. They just look like the people who perhaps end up in prison or they are sociopaths, right? They're people who don't care, don't sense
Hmm.
other people's needs, and don't necessarily interact well with others. So social anxiety serves a function to help us be motivated to care about other people. Now, I would say we can do this without disorder. So, like, there is a point where when we feel anxious, it does become disordered. But a little bit of worrying about what other people think and a little bit of worrying and caring about like how you treat other people can be really functional and helpful in a society, in a group of people to help motivate us to like consider others' feelings, to regulate our behavior, to be a little bit more like considerate and to be aware of that. So I like to reframe social anxiety sometimes in a more accepting way of like, oh, hey, social anxiety, thanks for showing up. Appreciate you, blasting me with like, try to care about everyone else. I'm going to notice you. I'm going to let's call this caring. And I'm going to try and care in the right way. So feeling anxiety is part of caring and being connected to people, and just allow yourself some grace. Like it's normal and natural to feel some anxiety, and it's not as helpful to be like, I should never feel this way. Or even worse,
Hmm.
I shouldn't be around people if I feel this way, or I should control or avoid if I feel this way.
Something I would throw in there and add is I love how you talk about, there's a huge spectrum of like where we all tend to fall in terms of our baseline level of anxiety, including social anxiety. But I
Yeah.
also think it's important along these lines of being validating and accepting of our anxiety that even within individuals at different times or in different phases of our life, or even just in different situations, it's very
Yes.
normal to have totally different levels of social anxiety. I remember things like when you go away to college, or when even when you like,
Mhm.
if you start living with someone, if you get married or start living with someone who you already know, that's a totally different situation. It's actually really
Yeah.
normal for anxiety to kind of spike or peak or just raise a little bit for a while during different situations. Again, it's like I think I learned from you this little saying of like, your anxiety is always trying to help. It might
Yeah.
not actually be helpful. It might be a little bit confused, or it might be not be going about it in the right way, but it's always
Yeah.
trying. It always has your best intentions at heart. And so I just wanted to share with people you shared that with me. And I love that. I think about that all the time.
Yeah. And it just like giving ourselves a little grace with anxiety also helps us escape that cycle of like getting anxious about our anxiety. So letting go of that anxiety about anxiety, just like let your anxiety just stay as it is instead of tripling it by getting anxious
Mm,
about what you feel.
that I call that compound anxiety when you get anxiety about anxiety, which
Yeah.
like the math on that is really weird. It's not like, 2 units of anxiety plus 2 units of anxiety equals 4 units. No, it's like 2 units of anxiety plus 2 units of anxiety somehow equals like 18 units. It just gets like
Plus some
exponentially huge.
depression afterwards,
Yeah,
right?
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Guilt, shame, all sorts of stuff. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
avoiding that, getting down on yourself for how you feel, including about social anxiety. I think it's really important. I want to pick your brain real quick on this. So you've described being accepting of or validating of your anxiety, normalizing it. Like, even though I don't like it, it's okay. Give yourself a little grace. Why do you think that's so hard? I think a lot of people really struggle with that. They know they should do it, and I'm sure
Yeah.
there's like 14 different answers to this. Like, what do you think is the big block there or the obstacle there?
Yeah, I would say two things come to mind. The first one is our socialization. So we've been told there is only one positive emotion, it is happiness, and all the other emotions are negative emotions, and you shouldn't feel them. And if you were a true man, you wouldn't feel them, right? And women should be men
Yes.
too, right? Except for anger. Anger doesn't count as an emotion. Men are not emotional, right? Like anger is
Right.
the
Right.
acceptable negative emotion. I mean,
Unless
so
you're a
there's a lot
woman,
of
then it's definitely not
socialization.
acceptable.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of socialization around emotions that basically says if you're not
Hmm.
feeling happy all the time, you must be doing something wrong. And so that's the external pressure I think we experience, and I think a lot of us haven't been taught anything else to do. We haven't been taught the second part, which is this emotion feels uncomfortable. So in our bodies, it feels uncomfortable, and we have most kids and most adults have very few skills to deal with making space for things that are uncomfortable, to sit with it instead of trying to make it go away. That is the skill that I call willingness from acceptance and commitment therapy, which is like you can learn this practical skill of making space in your body for things that are uncomfortable. And internal family systems uses a different model that's like,
Hmm.
hey, let's think about these as family members, and you've got one family member who's like, hey, you should be worried about everything. And one family member who's like, whatever. And it's like, you can listen to each of them, but you get to choose what you act on. And so I think there's a couple different ways to think about that.
I like that. I like too. There's a subtle difference there of, I think a lot of people hear like, some people like us saying, well, it's not bad to feel anxious. And they're like, yeah, I know it's not a bad thing. But I think what you pointed out is maybe the assumption is not so much that it's bad or even that I'm bad because I'm feeling anxious, but it's more like, wait a second, something must be wrong. Something's off.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to, but like I did something wrong or something happened. And but that's a tricky one because in some ways, that's kind of true because anxiety is sort of your brain's threat detection system, like trying to,
Right.
it's sort of on the lookout for things that might be dangerous. But it's totally normal to get false positives.
Yes.
That anxiety center is understandably conservative. It would rather
Yeah.
assume something's bad and it's not, rather than
Mm-hmm.
miss it entirely and then you get eaten or something. Right. So,
Exactly. It's like
but I think
a smoke
knowing,
alarm. Yeah.
yes,
It's like a smoke alarm. My smoke alarm has gone off in my house 200 times in my life. And one time something was on fire on the stove, on the stove, you know. And there's a reason we want our smoke alarms to be sensitive, just like we want our
yes.
anxiety to be kind of sensitive because it's a threat protection system, but it's not accurate. And we have to honestly acknowledge, like, thank you, anxiety, for being here. I'm going to check and see if there's a fire. And if not, I'm going to keep going.
Or the other metaphor I like that gets at a slightly different function is the on your dashboard in your car when you're low fuel, the little orange like fuel can light pops on.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like
Mm-hmm.
anything's broken. It's just giving you like a hey, heads up, you might want to like think about this a little bit more. Like,
Yeah.
no, the car's not going to blow up. Like, you're okay. You can drive for another 50 miles or whatever. But
Yeah.
be aware. And we all get a tiny little jolt of anxiety when we see the orange light flash on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you
Yeah.
said, like that's just it's serving a function. It's purposeful, and
I'm very grateful for that light.
yeah, totally. You would never want to like put a piece of electrical tape over it so you never had to see it anymore. That would
Yeah, just
be
just ignore it. Yeah, and that's what I think a lot of people do with their emotions. Like, I just want this warning light to go away. Can you please make it stop? And it's like, no. Instead, let's ask: am I running out of gas, or is my house on fire? And if
mm,
the answer is no, it's like, okay, great. What step should I take next? We should just
yeah.
ask and clarify. When we address and sit with our emotions, we face them and ask that question. A lot of times they resolve themselves.
Okay, so I'm going to jump on, and that was actually a good one because it transitions partly into my first one, which is I have this little mantra that I use for myself, and I used to use a lot of times with my clients, but it is don't be anti-anxiety, be pro-confidence. And I
Mm,
think this dovetails really well with what you were saying, but there's this old
yeah.
saying that I think it comes from Carl Jung. I think it's a paraphrase, but it's something like what we resist persists. So there's this certain
Yes.
class of thing in life where the more you struggle with it, actually the bigger it becomes. Maybe not right
Yeah.
away, but certainly long term. And that I think it's really key for people to understand this dynamic of when you either run away from or try to get rid of any uncomfortable emotion, including anxiety, social anxiety, you have to ask yourself, what is that behavior teaching my brain? My brain is watching me all the time. And if any
Yeah.
time I get anxious in social situations, I immediately try to avoid it or try to make it go away, I'm teaching my brain that that anxiety is a threat. It's dangerous.
Yes. Yeah.
So even if very briefly I feel a little bit better, the next time I get to a situation like this, I'm going to be even more anxious because I've taught my brain anxiety is bad. So now I'm getting anxiety
Hmm.
about anxiety. We talked about that. So I think that the mechanics of that are really important to understand because it's so counterintuitive. When we feel anxious, we just want to get rid of it.
Oh yeah.
But there's this saying you like, what am I teaching my brain? When you're thinking about your behavior, your brain is always watching and learning. It's learning
Hmm.
something, right?
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think this comes up with social anxiety a lot because I don't know about you, but there's something about my social anxiety clients were some of the hardest working clients I ever had. Like they were
No.
like, whatever it takes, Nick, like let's do it. Like exposure is like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
But um, I think you have to be really careful about when you're working on your social anxiety, what is success? I think if you don't think carefully about it, a lot of people assume that success is, okay, I go into a social situation and I didn't feel as anxious as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
That's not success. Like that's nice. I'm glad you didn't feel as anxious. But
Hmm.
what you actually want to do is, like you were saying, let your anxiety do whatever it wants. And instead, focus on building confidence. And confidence, at least in the way I think about it, is it's the belief that you'll be okay despite feeling afraid. It's the belief that you can do something important, like go socialize at a cocktail party or whatever it is,
Yeah.
despite the fact that you're nervous. So
Yes.
that
Yes.
is a
Yes.
skill that you can work on, you can focus on, and you can choose to pursue regardless of what your anxiety is doing over here. And
Hmm.
that's a much healthier approach long term to anxiety because you're not doing that thing of teaching your brain that anxiety is bad, which just leads to more anxiety long term. By
Yeah.
refocusing onto what's the thing I want to do that will build up my confidence. Because frankly, like you're always going to get anxious sometimes. Everybody gets, unless you have some sort of neurological conditions, everybody
Right.
gets anxious sometimes. There is
It's normal and healthy.
nothing abnormal about
Yeah.
that. The
Hmm.
question is, can you continue to do what you want to do, what you value, despite the fact that you feel that way? And you
Right.
will
Right.
the way to do that is to build up confidence, this belief that I can do the important thing despite feeling anxious. And I think the last thing I'll say about this, but the key with building up confidence is it's a skill like anything else. So if you wanted to learn a musical instrument, right? Let's say you want to learn guitar. You are not going to start off really good at guitar. In fact, you're going to suck. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be frustrating. It might be embarrassing. It might be anxiety inducing. It might be painful, literally. You're not just going to
Yeah.
be good at it. But the way you get both better at it and more confident is by doing it despite it being frustrated and continuing to go on. It's okay that you feel frustrated learning to play guitar. Literally everybody who has ever gotten good at playing guitar has felt frustrated. It's
Right.
totally
Yeah.
normal. So when
Yeah.
if you are trying to work through social anxiety, what this idea of don't be anti-anxiety, be pro-confidence, what that means is it's a subtle but important mind shift away from I need to get rid of my anxiety so I can go do things that are important to me. And
Hmm.
instead, I need to do things that will build up confidence so that I can do important things despite whether I feel anxious or not.
I love that. I love that. And I think if you ask someone honestly, has trying to get rid of your anxiety worked for you? Has it led to you feeling less anxiety? They'll usually say no. Has it led to you doing the things you really care about? Well, no, I avoid more situations now. So can you control that? Like, does it functionally work to be anti-anxiety, to try and make your anxiety go away? Is it working for you? And I think most people would absolutely say no. Has your anxiety gone up? Yes. But can we actually control our behaviors? Can we choose to do the thing while we're scared? Yeah, that's like something in our realm of control, where trying to force our emotions to change is not in our realm of control. I like
Yes.
that. That's a
I
great tip.
love I
Great
love you
tip.
brought up control. Like it's always about control at the end of the day.
We all
But
want it
it's like
so
but,
much.
but it's so natural when you feel bad, including when you feel anxious in a social situation. It's so natural for your focus to go on to the feeling and then to try and do
Mhm.
something about the feeling. But so
Yeah,
much
yeah,
of the art of, I think, working through social anxiety is about resisting that urge and instead keeping it on your behavior and your
yeah,
goals. What do I want to
yeah.
do? And ironically, not thinking too much about, just like you don't want to ignore emotions, you don't want to get
Right.
fixated on them either. That's going to lead you
Yeah,
down an equally unhelpful path. So being able to
yeah,
listen and be aware of them, but then move on to what you actually want to be doing, your behavior, your goals, that sort of thing.
yeah. I love it. And I think that takes that leads us to my next point. Is it okay if I move on to point number
Yeah,
two?
let's do it.
So the next point is like the way our brain works is attention. What we pay attention to, we get more of. So if we pay attention, like you were describing, if we pay attention to our anxiety, either by avoiding it or by like fixating on it, either of those options makes our anxiety bigger, because whatever we pay attention to, that's the behavior that we do, the mental behavior we do, that sends the message to our brain. This is really important. I'm going to make it bigger. So this skill of attention is my next main point. So it's about redirecting our attention from an inward focus to an outward focus. So you'll see this all the time with social anxiety. You'll see someone believing, oh, everyone's watching me. How do I like be perfect? Oh my gosh, am I sweating too much? Am I making enough eye contact? Oh, I'm touching my headphones. Sorry if that's blowing out your mind. Am I making enough eye contact? And you're to like do all these things internally, like, okay, I need to not feel anxious, I need to give enough eye contact, I need to stop sweating. And it's such an internal focus. So your attention, and I imagine attention like a big spotlight, or like the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings, but like a big spotlight. And we kind of choose where we aim this. So with social anxiety, a big trap people fall into is a very inward focus with their attention. I need to change how I feel. I need to change how I'm acting. What is everyone else thinking about me? And trying to basically control the situation to be perfect. And so I would say when we feel social anxiety, it's okay to notice that. It's okay to be like, oh, I notice I'm sweating a lot or I'm shaking. It's okay to notice, oh, I'm feeling a little anxious. And then you shift that spotlight outward. And so instead of trying to be like, everyone's watching me, how do I make them like me? Be like, huh, how can I show them that I care about them? I'm going to ask them a question about themselves. I'm going to listen to them. Or instead of like being like, oh my gosh, how am I feeling inside? Am I sweating too much? Be like, huh, like I'm just going to notice what's going on at this activity or this location. So it's an outward focus of like awareness outside of you too. And again, we're not stuffing it down. We're not suppressing our feelings.
Mm.
We're just noticing, acknowledging, and shifting our attention back outward. And I think sometimes when we have social anxiety, we really want to secretly try and control other people to make them like us. We're trying to make other people give us something, and to get and to get and to get like their approval, or to look so perfect or whatever it is. And we can switch that attention out to like, what can I give? Who can I help? How can I serve? And I don't mean this in an unhealthy way, but like we can shift that attention outward as well to other people. And just like you said, we can shift our attention as well away from our feelings toward our action. Okay, I get really anxious around crowds, but I want to be with my niece at her soccer game. So I care enough about this value that I'm going to shift my attention. I'm going to notice my feelings and I'm going to shift it back to like, I'm here and I'm going to cheer at the soccer game. And so that's what I would say is like my second point is like, let's develop the skill of redirecting our attention. And there's a lot of ways to practice this. Nick, you're the expert on this, right?
Yeah,
Mindfulness and meditation could be one way to practice, that skill of attention. And that's something we can choose to develop.
yeah. I think there's sort of like intense practices you can do. Like you can do sort of mindfulness training to like work out that muscle. But I think honestly, a lot of it is just like it's about reminding yourself in the moment. The impulse is for the attention to go inward, but I don't
Yeah.
have to do that. It's hard. There's kind of a
Correct.
gravity to that, but I can resist that and like pull it somewhere, push it somewhere else. And so I think a lot,
Yeah.
in some ways, it's partly a muscle problem. You can develop that, you can get stronger at doing that. But a lot of it's just a
Mhm.
memory problem. Like we just don't think in the moment to put it somewhere else. Our attention just goes wherever it's drawn. And so
Right.
that I think it's a metacognition, the ability to like step outside and like watch your thoughts and your emotions happen.
Hmm.
It's really, and that you can practice that anytime. It doesn't have to be with anxiety, even. It can be with anything. So that's a great one. While you were talking, this made me think of Jerry Seinfeld recently gave a commencement address at Duke, I
I
think,
heard
and he
about
said,
this.
"Did you hear about this?" Yeah, it was in the news.
I didn't hear what he said. I just heard some people walked out. That's all I heard.
Yeah, I went into it. I was like, "Ooh, what's the controversy?" I was gonna like watch it. I didn't find anything seemingly especially controversial, but he said something really interesting that I think actually kind of relates to what you're talking about. He was talking about this like the myth of following your passion and how you need to like find your passion and what he said, and people have critiqued that. Like I've heard a lot of people critique that. But the follow up to that was really interesting. He said, instead of trying to find your passion, be interested in things, be interested in people. Passion will
Hmm.
come from that. Get really interested, cultivate this
Yeah.
capacity to be interested in the world around you and the people in it. And so I think that
Hmm.
that immediately popped up when you were talking about like shifting that your attention outward onto other people and being
Yeah.
genuinely curious about wherever I am, whatever situation I'm in, whatever people are around me. So anyway, I love that idea of cultivating interestedness in other
I,
things.
I I like that. And that's like a practical thing we can do. And with social anxiety, we get so wrapped up in like trying to make other people like us and trying to look good. And the people don't necessarily like being around someone who likes that. But if you're the kind of person who's like, I'm interested in you, I care about you, I want to hear about you, people love that. So it's very like paradoxical there. Like as soon as we like turn a little bit more open and curious about other people and interested in them, they generally have a better experience with us.
Although all of that hinges on your first point of in order to do that, you have to believe that it's okay to feel the anxiety, to have the anxiety and then
Yeah.
shift off it. So I think it's
And,
nice that that was your second point, not your first, because it sort of flows from
yes.
the first one.
Yeah, and to reframe it as caring. Oh, I feel a little anxious. That's just
Yeah.
my smoke alarm reminding me to care about other people. I'll
Yeah.
show them I care. And that's more values, like a more values oriented approach. It's like I care, I want to treat other people well. That's one of my values. So I'm going to show them that, even though I
Yeah.
feel a little anxious.
All right. So my second point is spend more time around people who actually appreciate you and whom you enjoy. So this is
Yeah.
another like funny, and I don't know, maybe this is just me and my experience working with people with social anxiety, but an interesting pattern I saw with people who had social anxiety is they almost had this kind of compulsion to socialize with people who they wouldn't normally want to socialize with,
Oh,
as if it was like
interesting.
this like obstacle. Like in order to get over my social anxiety, I have to be able to socialize with anyone effortlessly, even people I don't like or people I wouldn't normally spend time around. Or anyway, to whatever extent that is like generalizable or not, there is a tendency, I think, with social anxiety to think, and I think a lot of ways this comes from kind of therapy culture where a lot of the solutions to anxiety are basically exposure. It's like, well, whatever you're afraid of, you got to do more of that. And there's a
Hmm.
lot to that, but there's a lot of nuance in that. But I think people get into this mindset of I just got to push myself to like socialize all over but they don't think a lot about the quality of that socializing.
Hmm.
And even
Hmm.
if your long-term goal, let's say your long-term goal is, I want to be able to socialize in any situation with any type of person, no matter how intimidating. I want to feel confident enough to do that. I want to do that. Great. That's an awesome long-term goal. But if you are
Yeah.
really struggling with social anxiety, why are you going? Don't go for a 10 out of 10. That's like trying to learn guitar and then immediately trying to play like Van Halen or something. Like it's just not
Right.
going to happen. That's not how you improve at things. You need to
Hmm. Hmm.
start small and build up this like accumulation of evidence that boosts confidence. So what I mean by that is if you spend more time around people you actually enjoy, people who really appreciate you and who are supportive, you're going to build up more positive social experiences. And those are going to provide this kind of base for moving up the ladder of more and more difficult social situations.
I
So
like that.
instead of going for the what's the 10 out of 10 hard social situation, I'm gonna go like rushing and do that. Right? Because I
Yeah.
see this a lot of time. People avoid, and then they finally hit rock bottom. They're like, I'm sick of this. I'm gonna beat my social anxiety. And so I'm gonna go to the cocktail party with people I don't even know. And then they go and it's totally overwhelming and
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
the worst. And then they get down on themselves afterwards. They're like, see, I can't get over it. Well, dude, your problem was like you're trying to play Van Halen and you should be playing like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. You got to
Hmm.
slowly like work up the confidence and competence ladder.
Yeah.
So I think giving yourself permission, this is another instance of your use of the term, like giving yourself grace, giving yourself space, permission. It's not always, it doesn't always have to be this challenge, right? You can just give yourself permission to spend time with people you actually like and who really like you. It sounds dumb saying that out loud, but in my
Yeah.
experience, it's surprising how rare that is. Like people with social anxiety, they're so focused on the social situations that cause a lot
Yeah.
of anxiety and that stress them out and that they feel like they
Yeah.
need to overcome. And even if that's your
Yeah.
long-term goal, I think you're going to be more likely to get there if you think about and enjoy some of those situations. And like, I don't know, no matter how much social anxiety you have, people always have, there's certain people in situations where you feel more comfortable, you feel more able to be your authentic self. So start there.
I like
And
that.
you could even like experiment. One of the things I used to do is you can experiment with find someone, a friend, a partner, or whatever, who you are pretty comfortable with, but then do unusual social situations with them, things that are a little intimidating. Right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you've got someone who helps you sort of be confident,
Hmm.
but you're pushing yourself a little bit. So that's like one little way you can do that. But in general, this idea of, yeah, just spend more time around the people you actually enjoy and who seem to really appreciate you, because that's gonna provide you more evidence of your ability to do social situations well. And that's going to help you
Oh,
be more confident in the future.
yeah. I think that's really important. And I think about myself, like in college, I found my group of like granolas and they're like all these outdoorsy friends who I felt great around. And now I'm like, 40, living in the suburbs, and my friends invite me to like book clubs and like recipe nights, and I make myself go. And I always leave those like thinking, oh my gosh, I'm like, I don't always, I don't, my work in my worst moments, I think, oh my gosh, I'm so weird. I'm so like, I don't know how to talk about recipes. But then I go hang out with my like outdoorsy granola friends, and I'm like, oh, I am a good person. I have
Yes.
friends, you know? And it's like, I can still go to book club. I like book club, and I can still go to recipe night, but it's like, it's not quite the same confidence boost as just like hanging out with my people where I feel really home at home with. And I can go with, I like your example too of like, oh, I could go with one of those people and go do something kind of weird. And I would
Hmm.
feel like we could joke about it more. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, let me jump into my point number three then. Is that good?
Let's do it. Yep.
Okay. So I think this point is about it's very cognitive. It's about how we think. And I think that there are a lot of things we do with social anxiety, but the one that stands out the most to me is after you go to book club and then you come home and you're like, why did I say that? Like, did was that the stupidest thing ever? Does everyone hate me? Do they all think I'm mean? And it's this post social event rumination where you just sit there and think, oh my gosh, I'm such an idiot. I'm such a like socially inept or whatever that is. I think this is really common for a lot of people, and it's a hard cycle to break out of. And with any thought cycle, it can be there's a couple different approaches, and one of them is saying, like, is this reasonable? Is this rational? Let's challenge this
Mm.
thinking a little bit. And the other approach is like, hey, let's just acknowledge those thoughts and move on. And that's like kind of acceptance and commitment therapy versus CBT. And acceptance and commitment therapy is like, let's not fight those thoughts. Let's just say, hello, thought. Thanks
Yeah.
for being here. I appreciate it. I'm going to notice my social anxiety shouting at me right now, and I'm going to go back to doing what I'm doing. This works for me sometimes. This is my baseline with a lot of things with anxiety. But the other approach as well can be helpful. So I want to just like lay out a couple of ways to think about these these situations. And the first one is usually, and there's evidence on this, that people evaluate themselves falsely. Like they do not clearly see themselves as well as they think. Like
Hmm.
you're going to assume people don't like you when they don't care, or they didn't notice, or they actually do like you. So this faulty self-evaluation is a really big part of that. So I think it's important to kind of hold on to this little lifeline of like, hey, if I wouldn't say this to a friend, if I wouldn't think this about someone else, then it's most likely other people aren't thinking it about me. And so anytime you could say like, oh, if my friend said that, would I be hating her? You're like, no. Would I be thinking she's stupid? No. Then you can kind of use that as a little bit of a lifeline. Be like, okay, then this is probably emotional reasoning. This is probably a cognitive distortion. You're just gonna acknowledge that thought, move over to like, let's try something else. The other thought I think that really keeps people locked in social anxiety is the belief that like if I messed up, like what if I actually did say something really stupid?
Hmm.
What if I actually did say something that was kind of hurtful? Or what if I did say something that was like kind of offensive or whatever? Like what if I messed up actually? I think the belief behind this that fuels social anxiety is like it would be catastrophic.
Hmm.
I would not survive. No one would like me. And this is going back to like our root brain of like, oh, if people in the village don't like me, they're going to kick me out of the village and I'm going to starve to death in the wilderness, right? Like this is that
Totally.
catastrophic thinking. And so I think it can be helpful to ask yourself the question. So, okay, worst case scenario, everyone at that party hates you. Are you going to die? Are you going to die of starvation? Are you going to get kicked out of your city? And to just remind yourself, no, this feels dangerous, but I'm actually safe. Feels threatening, but even if everyone does hate me, I'm actually safe. And I think this is like this catastrophizing is also very closely connected to perfectionism, which is this belief like, oh, I have to be perfect to be accepted. I can never mess up for people to like me and value me. And I would replace that one with, I value real human connection with human beings. And I value that enough to accept that real human connection comes with mistakes and feelings. It comes with them making mistakes and me having feelings about it, me making mistakes and me having feelings about it, and them having feelings about it. And like that's the reality of the human connection. And so these are some of like the lifelines I cling to. Oh, I look like I'm
Yeah.
milking a cow, but I'm imagining a lifeline here.
You just talked about how
When
granola and outdoorsy you are, Emma. So that's normal, I think.
thank you. I don't have a cow yet, but I've been thinking about getting a goat. So those are kind of the three things. If you wouldn't say it to a friend, it's probably a cognitive distortion. If you do
Hmm.
make a mistake, you're probably not going to get kicked out of the village and starve, and you don't have to be perfect. Instead, focus on like real human connections.
You know what I really appreciate about this last point that you've talked about is, and in fact, I'll say when you showed me your brief notes about what you wanted to talk about this, for the last one, and you said rumination. I was like, why the hell is she talking about rumination in an anxiety video? Like we're talking about anxiety, like
Right.
rumination.
Yeah.
I think about like depression, self-criticism,
Depression.
stuff like that, but it makes so much sense. And also it's such just this general point that when people have social anxiety, there's a lot of focus on the anticipation, the build-up phase before whatever the event is or the thing is. And then there's
Hmm.
like a lot of focus on the situation itself.
Yeah.
But there's this whole phase after a difficult
Yeah.
situation that people don't think about, but it's easy to fall into these really unhelpful negative thought patterns like rumination, self-criticism, catastrophizing, perfect, all that kind of stuff. So I
Hmm.
think just being mindful of that on like a higher level, just being mindful that what happens after a difficult, you think you're in the clear, but if
Hmm.
you start ruminating in unhelpful ways or dwelling on stuff, that's really going to contribute and maintain a lot of the social anxiety. So just to be mindful of that, there's that third phase where you also want to be careful about, again, kind of where is your mind going and what is it doing in that
Hmm.
in that time afterwards. I think that's kind of an aha for me, but yeah, super important.
Well, and if you think about what feeds anxiety, avoidance and control, which is a form of avoidance, rumination is a form of trying to control. I'm trying to be
Mm,
perfect, so I'm going to analyze the game after the game. I'm going to analyze everything, see what I could do better. And it's just another form of avoidance. So you think you're being helpful because you're going to protect yourself from making a mistake next time, but you're really clinging to this false form of avoidance and control. And I think it's a bigger problem than a lot of people realize.
Well, speaking of avoidance, that tees up my third tip really well, which is
Yeah.
avoid safety behaviors and coping skills. So safety behaviors are this technical term that comes from when you traditionally when you treat anxiety, you use a technique called exposure and response prevention. It's one of the most, well-studied, effective ways to treat basically any type of anxiety. And it's what people
Yep.
think when everyone's heard of exposure. Oh, I've got anxiety, I'm going to go do exposure. My therapist recommended I do exposure. But everyone leaves
Hmm.
off the second two parts of the phrase. Everyone talks about exposure, but no one thinks about response prevention. And what the response prevention part is, it's really important. It's just as important as the exposure part. Not only do you have
Mm.
to confront your fears, you have to confront them and then prevent yourself from
Mm.
doing things to avoid or minimize or lessen the anxiety while you're doing the
Mm.
exposure, right? You have to
Right.
prevent yourself from running away or avoiding the whole point is to get anxious and be with the anxiety and do the thing anyway. That's the whole
Yeah.
point.
So
It
like,
doesn't matter, even if you get really anxious, but then you start doing something. You start like rattling off positive self-talk in your head, or you call a friend to like, talk you through the difficult situation or whatever it is.
mhm.
Again, go back to that question. What am I teaching my brain? I'm going to do this hard thing, but I can only get through it if I have someone else talking me down, or if I implement all these like weird rituals and safety behaviors and coping
Right.
skills. When the whole point,
Hmm.
what you want to teach your brain is, I can feel anxiety and do what I want to do anyway. That's the
Yes.
only way through social anxiety, really any kind of anxiety. So you have to be really careful for these, and often they're very subtle, but we call them safety behaviors.
Hmm.
Things you would, if it was social anxiety, again, maybe you go in, but okay, I'm going to this party, but I know so and so, my friend's going to be there, so I'm just going to kind of like hang out with them the whole time, and just like
Hmm.
schlep off in a corner and just like sit there. That's going to
Right.
help me kind of like get through this thing, or even something. Again, I mentioned it before, but like people people misuse positive self-talk all the time. They use it as an avoidance
Mm.
mechanism. Like, I'm
Mm.
fine, nothing's going wrong, everything's gonna be okay, everything's gonna be okay. And the idea is the motivation behind it is what's important. There's nothing theoretically wrong with positive self-talk. It can be helpful sometimes, but if you're using
Yeah.
it as a way to avoid the experience of anxiety, you're still teaching your brain anxiety is bad, and you're going to have more anxiety the next time around. So you have to be really thoughtful about the motivations behind these urges and tendencies we all get, understandably, when we're anxious to try to avoid or get rid of the anxiety. And instead say, no, the whole point is to practice being willing to have the anxiety, to tolerate it instead of trying to get rid of it. So you want to really watch out for rituals and superstitions. Reassurance seeking is a really big one. That's a really common safety behavior. All sorts of, there's coping skills, positive self-talk, distraction, all
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. If you really want to build the confidence to be able to handle social situations well, you have to show your brain that anxiety is okay. I'm okay with having anxiety. I'm willing to have anxiety. And safety
Yeah.
behaviors and coping skills, they short circuit that process. They interfere with it.
Yeah.
And so your progress through anxiety is going to be way slower because your brain's not learning as well. If you're doing
Hmm.
all these things to temporarily relieve or distract from or get rid of anxiety. When I was working with people, this was by far the best predictor of whether someone worked through their social anxiety quickly or really, really slowly. Is
Hmm.
how rigorous were they about being aware of and not engaging in safety behaviors and letting themselves feel and be willing to have the anxiety.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting. I just filmed a video of me doing exposure therapy on myself. So I'm a climber, but I haven't climbed in 6 years. So I've gotten very afraid of climbing,
Oh yeah,
honestly. There's a type of
as you
climbing
as
where
you
you,
should be naturally.
yeah,
I think
it's good to be afraid of
good to be
falling. Like,
afraid. Yep.
yes. And so there's two types of climbing. There's top roping where the rope's already at the top. There's lead
Uh-huh.
climbing where you take the rope up with you as you go. And with lead climbing, after you clip in at a certain place on the wall and you fall, if you're 5 feet above your anchor, you'll fall 10 to 15 feet. Like that's
Mm, okay.
it's not life threatening. You sprain an ankle is usually the worst, but it's like scary to fall. So I was afraid of falling. And one of the things I would do is when I would lead climb, I would always make sure to lead climb something that I knew I wouldn't fall on. So I'd always just over
Mm,
grip and I'd be like holding on really tightly and make sure I never fell. And so I was still lead climbing, but I was still just as afraid of falling. So that's an example of, like, for me, a safety behavior is like I was gripping so tightly to make sure I never messed up so that I never had to fall. But that meant that to do that, I had to climb like 8 grades below my
Mm.
potential. Like so I had to climb like a 5'10" instead of a 5'12 because I was always making sure to avoid falling. And so the way I worked on it was I went to the gym and I forced myself to take 10 falls every single time I went to the gym. And honestly, the first 3 falls, I still felt just as afraid. And it wasn't
Sure.
until like fall 4, 5, 6 that I was like, oh, okay. Okay, now I'm getting bored by like 8, 9, 10. And then I'm much less anxious about falling now.
That's such a good example. Like to me, that illustrates two really core principles that any kind of behavior, like the effect of any behavior on your anxiety, it's never predetermined. So like positive self-talk can be helpful in some situations, and it can be really unhelpful. It can make your anxiety better or worse, depending on
Right.
how you're using it. I think that's really,
Mm-hmm.
really key. Any
Mm-hmm.
behavior, it depends on, is the primary motivation to get rid of anxiety, then it's a safety behavior and it's going to be ultimately unhelpful, right?
Is
So I
it
think that's
anti-anxiety or is it pro-confidence?
exactly. Is it done in the service of an actual goal, like getting up the
Mm-hmm.
mountain, or is it done because
Mm-hmm.
I'm terrified of falling, or even because I'm terrified of getting more afraid, which is a really
Yeah,
common
I'm
one,
trying not to feel.
right?
I'm just trying
Yes,
not to feel. And it's this
exactly.
inward focus of like, make my feelings go away, or an outward focus of like, is this a tool that's going to help me live my values?
Yes. So any behavior can be confidence promoting or anxiety promoting. And often
Yeah.
it depends on your motivation behind it. Why are you doing it?
Oof.
But the other thing
This
that
is why
like
anxiety is so freaking sneaky.
it is it's incredibly sneaky. Yeah. But the other thing you mentioned that I think is really, really important, and it goes back to that metaphor of like learning to play the guitar or any kind of instrument or learning any sort of skill, really. We know in almost any area of life where if we want to get better at something, you have to go slowly. You start small and you work your way up slowly. Right? Again, you don't
Yep.
like, if you want to learn the piano, you don't start off trying to play Bach. Like you start off with Twinkle,
Mm-hmm.
Twinkle, Little Star, and then you slowly, incrementally work your way up. So I think it's the same with you gave that great example of like, because all those safety behaviors were a signal to you, this is too much. I need to go down a level. Like I'm going to go practice the gym at a lower level so I can build up both my skill and competence and then slowly start working your way back up. So instead, when
Yeah.
you get that tremendous fear and that urge to use all these safety behaviors, again, that's not, don't frame that as a bad thing or something's wrong. It's just a
Yeah.
signal that you need to go down a level and work more
Mm-hmm.
there and then start going
Mm-hmm.
back up again. So I think,
That's exactly right.
yeah.
Because as I thought about doing climbing exposure, like falling exposure therapy for myself, all I could think of was these 10 and 15-foot falls.
Mm-hmm.
And when I dialed it back, I made my exposure hierarchy list, my fear ladder,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, what about a 5-inch fall, Emma? What about a 5-inch fall? And the first time I went to the gym, I did 10 like 6-inch falls. But the first three were still scary. And then the
Yeah.
next time I did like a foot falls. And the next time I did 2-foot falls. By the end, I was doing 10-foot falls. But I was going to avoid doing the whole video altogether, avoid doing the whole experience and practice altogether, when all I could think of was doing like the 10 to 15-foot falls that are kind of required to do like real lead climbing.
Yeah. I think it goes back to your point about perfectionism and kind of black and white thinking, right? Is that we get in this mindset of
Also,
like,
that.
I got to go big or go home, like it's this or this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
learning to think more granularly, more shades of gray about building confidence, working through anxiety, dealing with social situations. I think that's such a important kind of high level mindset thing that we both talked about in various ways, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been really helpful and totally fun, as always, Emma. I
Yeah.
thought a fun way to kind of wrap up and end would be with, if you want to, we can each kind of share. I thought if we each shared a, a recommendation. So something out there that you would recommend for someone struggling with social anxiety, promote something of your own, something you have that people struggling with this might be interested in. And then a final thought, just a brief final thought to close it out.
Yeah. You want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Um, First thing I would recommend, I like the book Painfully Shy. It's specifically about
Hmm.
social anxiety, and I liked it. I learned a lot from it. Second thing, I'll just let people know I do have a full course. It's called Break the Anxiety Cycle in 30 Days, and it's got 30 videos kind of explaining how the anxiety cycle works and some practical strategies to break that cycle. Yeah. Okay, and then my final thought on anxiety, and I'm still trying to find the exact words for this, like how to put this into words. So here we go. Here's what I think. People with social anxiety believe that there are two types of people: those who make social mistakes and those who don't. And the reality is, people who have anxiety are trying to control all of their mistakes and other people's perception of them. And people without social anxiety accept their mistakes and focus on connection with other people.
Awesome. I really like it.
Let's hear
Let's see.
yours.
So yeah, so my first recommendation is this book called The Assertiveness Workbook. This is
Oh my
actually the old
gosh,
version.
Nick,
There's a
I
new
have
version.
started working through this book. I'm sorry. This is an older version of it, but I have started working through this book and I'm like, oh, this is so good.
It's the best. I worked through it. I gave it to all my clients. I even give it to my wife. I rarely like give her or recommend books of it. And she loved it. She like worked through it so diligent. Like you open it up and like all the little lines are filled out. It's a
It's
real workbook. And I think, I don't know about you, but like I think when it comes to really any kind of anxiety, but I think especially social anxiety, assertiveness is one of the most underrated but powerful skills and things to work on. So like there were frequently times when I was working with people with anxiety where I thought we could not focus on anxiety explicitly at all and just work on assertiveness, and that would probably take care of most of their anxiety. Just that. So anyway, it's such a good book. Like I should be making commission off of it. I recommend it so much to people,
I
but
bought
it's
it because you recommended it, and I absolutely can second that. So sorry to talk over
yeah.
you, but I'm
No, no, no.
excited about that book too.
Yeah, it's a good one. Promotion, I think I too have an anxiety course. It's called Creating Calm, and it's similarly, it's sort of like Emma's got her, you've got your take on anxiety, and like in a lot of ways, as anyone who's listening can tell, we share a lot of the same fundamental ideas. And I think so much of working through anxiety, or really anything, I suppose, is like finding a particular someone whose sort of angle on or like vibe about working through anxiety fits you and your personality and your values. And so I think, yeah, anyway, so I've got a course on that. It's kind of it's my style or take on it. And yeah, people can check that out if they're interested, Creating Calm.
I
And then
took
my
that course and I really liked it and learned a bunch from it too. So
thank you, Emma. Yeah, you were on the very first version of that live
that's
version of it
right.
when I
Yeah,
first did it. That's right.
I really liked it.
Um, I think my final thought is I basically just want to echo your first point, which is that just because anxiety feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. Like it's okay. It sucks and it's awful. And I don't want to minimize how difficult it is, but at the most fundamental level, it's okay to feel anxious, even tremendously anxious in social situations. You have to start from there if you're going to work through it, I think, in any kind of healthy way. Starting with acceptance and validation and normalization is just, I think that's the most fundamental thing. So I think that's my parting thought. All right, Emma, thanks again. Really appreciate it. It was fun chatting.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me, and I'm sure it's gonna help a bunch of people. Well, thank you.